So today we have Nurse Attorney Cathleen Summers, which most of you know her, but I'm going to tell you about her anyway. She is one of our founding partners of Generations Law Group. She has over 25 years of legal experience, and she concentrates her legal practice on crisis planning, Medicaid and long-term care planning, estate planning, and guardianship. She's the go-to expert on helping clients and their families navigate the legal and healthcare worlds when a crisis occurs. She specializes in crisis management and often supports families who are unable to provide frequent oversight of a loved one's care. Cathleen is often sought out by professionals to serve as an advisor to local hospitals and be a member of several boards in the community. She currently serves as the Vice President of the Massachusetts chapter of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for taking some time today to talk about what we really have found is a growing issue and an area that we're seeing more and more people fitting into for a variety of reasons. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with everyone so I can put the PowerPoint presentation up. So give me just a moment. But while I'm doing that, what I'd like to do is just kind of go through with you all some statistics that we've seen in terms of this growing area. The U.S. Census said that by the year 2034, there'll be more 65 and older Americans than those under the age of 18. And out of that, about a quarter of baby boomers, those who were born between 1946 and 1964, don't have children. And about a third of Americans aged 45 to 62 are single. And so this is really a growing group of people, those of us who may be finding ourselves solo for multiple reasons, whether it be that we never chose to enter into a long-term relationship, we didn't have children, we've lost a spouse, our family is at a distance, etc. So lots of reasons. So this area of flying solo and being a solo ager really is growing. One of the things that we've really seen in the law practice is that we focus not just on the legal aspect of things, and that aging really does require planning, and whenever possible, planning ahead. Crises is always something that we deal with, but crises oftentimes gives you much less opportunity, much less choice. And so planning ahead is something that you really want to think about doing and thinking about a plan for yourself and what that's going to look like. So one of the things that we found out is that putting together a life plan really can happen at any age. You know, it's not just for people who are older, let's say 65 or older, although that's typically the time that people really do begin to take a look at aging and how they want aging to occur. Part of a life plan is making sure that you identify your expectations and assumptions as you age. You know, most of us think, quite frankly, that we're going to be able to continue to live at the current standard that we're at, or that we will be able to continue to do the things that we're currently doing. And oftentimes as we age, we do begin to experience some loss in certain areas, and we have to be prepared for that. So a life plan looks at multiple different areas. First of all, it's going to look at overall health and healthcare issues that you may be facing now or potentially in the future. It's going to look at legal and financial matters for you as well. And I'll talk a lot about, you know, the legal documents that need to be put in place and working on the financial aspect of things. It looks at your work life and retirement. What does your current possible work life look like? How long do you want to work? And what are your plans for retirement? Because as we say here, life is what happens while you're busy making other plans, and that's really true. And if we don't make plans for our retirement, retirement can end up being very bumpy for us. I'm going to talk a little bit about the psychological issues and the functional issues that people face as well. And then the social roles, housing, and community issues that we recommend people think about when they're putting together a life plan. One of the things that Carol's going to send to everybody after today's presentation is a thing called that we have put together about 10 questions to consider about aging. And this is really where you can take a look at for yourself, your presumptions about aging, your presumptions about where you are currently and where you're headed, the things that are important to you. And so it does help to give you a little bit of a framework to begin this life planning exercise. One of the big categories, health and healthcare issues. One of the things to remember is that it's never too late to begin to make changes with respect to your health and your health care. Changes with respect to your mobility, getting a control on things like your diet, getting control on your own healthcare needs. It's really important that you take a look at all of these and honestly review them and begin to make incremental changes where you can. Even as they say, 30 minutes of getting out and just taking a walk, whether it be in 15-minute increments twice a day, can really have a long-term impact on your overall health. It's important that you make sure that you have established a relationship with a primary care physician or a primary care healthcare provider. Somebody who can get to know you and who you can get to know from a practice standpoint so that if issues arise or when issues arise, you've got somebody who understands your history and that you have a level of comfort with. So I can't tell you how many people I know who have not established a working relationship with a good primary care provider. So that's critical for you. Make sure you understand your own healthcare needs. Whether you are healthy and have no particular issues right now, or whether you're dealing with some kind of a diagnosis with the potential of a chronic illness or even some kind of a primary sudden illness, you really do want to begin to understand what that means for you and what the potential future can bring with changes in your healthcare. Understanding your insurance is super important. Some of us are covered still by healthcare plans by an employer or by potentially a spouse's employer. Others of us are now on Medicare or Medicaid. And understanding what the benefits are that your healthcare insurance provides and what the limits are on that insurance are very important. So for instance, Medicare, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it, but we consider it to be a sick insurance policy, meaning that it doesn't typically cover well visits that we're used to when we had insurance through our employer. So going to your doctor to get your primary or your yearly annual physical is not typically covered by Medicare, but I'm going to talk about when that is covered by Medicare. So understanding what Medicare will cover if that's your primary insurance and what you're going to have to find a way to cover should you need to have additional care. So understanding your health, your healthcare issues, beginning to establish that relationship with your own care providers and starting to take incremental steps to improve your own healthcare and taking control of your healthcare is really critical in a successful life aging plan. So let's talk a little bit about insurance. And there's typically, we see as we age, two basic insurance coverage areas that people will have. Medicare is really the federally run system that any of us who are over the age of 65 or disabled, there are other criteria, but for most of us, Medicare becomes our primary insurance. If you're fortunate enough to still have a employer-based program that will follow you through retirement, that's phenomenal because it oftentimes provides a larger basis of healthcare coverage than Medicare. But again, Medicare is what we call a sick policy. It's there to cover crises. So when you have a fall, when you have a sudden illness, when you need hospitalization, Medicare is usually the primary insurance to cover those needs. Now it has limitations. So for instance, it typically only covers 80% of what might be covered in a healthcare or needed in a healthcare crisis through a hospitalization. And you're oftentimes responsible for the other 20%. And so this is where people will look at getting what's called Medigap programs or signing on to one of the Medicare preferred programs. A Medicare preferred program is a program that you pay extra money each year in order to be able to get extra benefits above and beyond what basic Medicare covers. I oftentimes think about it as being more akin to an employer-based insurance plan, because oftentimes they'll cover well visits. They may cover a larger array of medications. They'll oftentimes cover more of the cost for things like physical therapy, for rehab services, or for hospitalization. But you do pay extra for that annually. Medigap programs are freestanding health programs or health insurance programs that you can purchase again for additional monies to be able to cover that gap that I talked about, that 20% that you're often responsible for with basic Medicare. Medicaid, or what we call MassHealth here in Massachusetts, is a state-run program, even though it does have a federal basis to it, but it is oftentimes a program that helps to provide medical coverage for those who meet certain income and/or asset limitations. And there's usually two basic Medicaid programs that we look at. One is a community-based program, and that's for helping to have people stay in the community, in their own homes, whether it be in their apartment or a home that they own, and keeping them out of a facility like a nursing home. And then there's long-term care coverage under Medicaid, and that is to cover nursing home-based care. The requirements to become eligible for Medicaid, again, are based on assets and income. And it depends on which program you're looking at and what types of services you're looking to have. Those who meet certain disability criteria also may be covered under Medicaid. And so Medicare is the federally run system that most of us over the age of 65 are able to benefit from. And Medicaid is for those who meet specific income and asset limits run by the state. So understanding your insurance and understanding where there may be gaps in the coverage is really important. Next, I want to talk about legal and financial matters. And this is really critical to the solo ager in particular. Making sure that you have your legal documents in place is absolutely imperative. So first of all, let's talk about what these documents are and what they do. First is the healthcare proxy. A healthcare proxy is specific to Massachusetts. This is a document in which you name someone to step into your shoes to make healthcare decisions for you should you become incompetent or incapacitated. So let me tell you a little bit about what happens when you don't have a healthcare proxy in place. First of all, what we're finding is actually the latest census has shown that 1 in 5 adults over the age of 65 don't have some kind of healthcare directive in place. And so if you don't have a healthcare directive in place and something were to happen, you ended up being hospitalized or needed care and you were not competent or capable of making your own decisions, then a court is going to intercede and a guardian is going to be sought in order to make those decisions for you. You'll have no control over who that guardian is, and that guardian will have no framework of understanding your healthcare desires, what's important to you in terms of healthcare decisions. And oftentimes these types of decisions involve end-of-life decision-making. Whether to keep somebody on some kind of artificial life support, whether to go with things like hospice care, Any of these end-of-life decision-making, do not resuscitate, do not rehospitalize orders are considered to be extraordinary decision-making. And if a healthcare proxy has not been identified by you ahead of time, then a court is going to get involved and potentially a stranger is going to be in the position of making those decisions for you. I'm oftentimes appointed by the court to act as someone's healthcare decision maker, to be their guardian. And the difficult part about being in that position for me is that I don't know the person ahead of time. I've never met them, never had a chance to understand who they are and what was important to them prior to this emergency happening and needing to be put in this position as a guardian. So putting a healthcare proxy in place ahead of time is critical to ensure you're having your decision maker, the person who you want to be appointed, in that position. Now, for solo agers, this can be difficult sometimes because if we don't have family around, if we don't have a support network that we can rely on, healthcare decision making can become one of the places where there's a gap. And you don't then end up having somebody of your choice to be able to advocate for you. So this is where developing, again, relationships, not only with your healthcare providers, so that you've had a chance to discuss with them ahead of time what healthcare decision-making decisions are important to you and how you want those decisions to be made, but also potentially working with other professionals, whether it be your legal professionals, whether it be care management professionals. There are advocates out there who you can develop a relationship with, who then would be able to be in the position of acting as your healthcare proxy if needed. But it takes, again, thinking ahead and making sure that you're addressing these issues before the need becomes apparent. A couple of other legal documents to let you know about. One is a HIPAA authorization and release form. And this is where you're giving permission for people who, friends, relatives, people who are important to you, to speak with your healthcare providers. They're not decision makers, but they are able to be part of discussions about your healthcare needs, about what decisions should be made on your behalf. And so the healthcare proxy is where you're naming someone to step into your shoes. The HIPAA is where you're giving the authority to speak with your healthcare providers and be part of a conversation, but not a decision maker. The other legal documents in the healthcare arena that we see, first is a living will. This is a statement document, and typically it talks about not wanting extraordinary measures to be used. It's not legally binding in Massachusetts, but it is evidence and direction about what's important to you. And so remember, it's always the healthcare proxy, or if there is no proxy, the guardian, who will make the healthcare decisions, but the living will can help to provide some direction. And another document in the healthcare kind of arsenal is called a MOLST form. And that is a medical order for life-sustaining treatment. This is a document that you do with your healthcare provider, not with your legal professional. And it talks very specifically about the things you would or would not want to have done in a medical crisis. Most times, healthcare providers won't do a MOLST form with you unless you are at getting toward an end stage of a disease process, if you have a diagnosis of some kind of an illness that is believed will result in end of life, or if you are above a particular age, and that age is really going to be determined by your healthcare provider. Is it 75? Is it 80? Is it 85? It's really dependent on your healthcare provider. But what it is, again, is a specific document that outlines your wishes in certain circumstances, like not being resuscitated, not being put on artificial means or life support, And this medical order, like a prescription, can follow you from one place to another. So whether you're living at home, whether you're in some kind of a care community or a facility like a nursing home, or whether you're hospitalized, the most order can follow you into each of those different realms and then can be followed by any healthcare providers providing you with services. So for instance, if you're at home and you are at end stage of a disease process and you have a MOLST form in place signed by your doctor saying you do not want to be resuscitated, if an emergency happened and someone called 911, when the paramedics arrive, they are then able to follow the MOLST and honor your wishes of not being resuscitated. So MOLST forms are something that you want to talk about with your individual healthcare providers. And then the last document is not really a healthcare related document. It really is in the realm of financial. It is the durable power of attorney. This is a very broad-based document in which you're giving somebody authority to be able to step into your shoes to handle your financial matters. You really can handle all matters but healthcare under a power of attorney, including decisions about where you might live. And so again, it's a very powerful document in which you're asking somebody else to step into your shoes to make decisions for you, should you be unable to manage those things for yourself. And again, like the healthcare proxy, the importance of putting that document in ahead of time can't be overstated, because if something happened to your competency or your capacity to manage your own affairs, and you don't have someone named in this type of a legal document, we don't know who should be stepping into your shoes to take care of your bills, manage your finances, make decisions about where you live. And so putting this in place ahead of time is critical. And again, for those who are solo agers, it can be very difficult sometimes to identify somebody to be in that position. Creating that relationship with a professional who you trust and who you've had an opportunity to really develop a relationship with ahead of time can be critical if you choose to have them be in the position of your power of attorney, because you want them to understand what's important to you and what the framework is for decision making on your behalf. Because remember, they're to act on your behalf, not for themselves. And so understanding what's important to you is critical so that they have the framework for proper decision making. And just a little aside there with financial planning, certainly financial planners can be an absolute benefit here in terms of, again, another professional who can help you to understand from a financial standpoint how long your money will last, what types of things that you are good investments for you or not. You know, should you buy that condo? Should you instead maybe rent? Do you want to look at living in a continuing care community? All of those kinds of options, a financial planner can be very, very helpful. And one of the recommendations, again, ahead of time that they make is that you have 70 to 80% of your pre-retirement income is needed to maintain your standard of living. And so working with a financial planner can help you to outline whether what you have will help you live the way you want to, or if there are adjustments that need to be made in your plan. One of the other areas that we talk a lot with people about is the work life and retirement balance. You know, a lot of us are spending when we're in our working years, we're working, we're trying to save, etc. And we don't plan a lot for what retirement will look like. People talk about retirement as a time frame, as a date. You turn 65, you turn 68, time to retire. Well, what does that really mean? More and more of us are living well beyond retirement years. When Social Security was originally started, the life expectancy was somewhere around 67 years. And so the age of 65 for retirement was very reasonable in terms of saving money and what life would look like afterward. There wasn't a lot of planning that needed to be done for that. But as we're living longer and oftentimes living 20, even 30 years after quote unquote retirement, we really need to make sure that we're planning for retirement. So financially, without question, you need to make sure you're planning for retirement. But you also have to make sure you're planning for retirement in terms of your own productivity, what's your interest, how are you going to stay engaged? Because one of the things that the research shows is that staying engaged, staying active as you age is absolutely one of the top predictors for aging successfully. So what does retirement really look like? What's your plan? What are the things that interest you? Is this a time in which you're going to say, I'm going to continue to work. I want to continue to have some kind of, whether it be I need the income or I choose to have a work life. I want to continue to do that even after quote unquote retirement years. Or is this a time in which you want to start engaging in new activities? Maybe you have some passions that have been put on the back burner that you now really want to explore, whether it be, charitable work, whether it be hobbies, passions, any of the interests that you have. You want to start thinking about those if you can, even before retirement. And if you have already retired, then you really want to start to make sure you're exploring those things and finding ways to keep yourself engaged and to keep yourself active. Again, it's a critical determinant in terms of aging successfully and being able to keep your health and your quality of life as high as possible. Remember, for many, retirement can be seen as a loss. And so you have to think about how are you going to fill those gaps of retirement as part of your life plan. That leads really well into what we consider the psychological issues of aging. And there's a lot of things that go into this aspect of it. Remember, a lot of us, as we age, both through experience as well as what the media and everything around us tell us, is that you can lose mental acuity, your physical abilities are going to change, you're going to lose control, you're going to lose competence. Yes, some of that does happen as we age. Certainly we begin to have some different physical issues. As each of us goes to stand from a sitting position to a stand up after being there for a long time, it's certainly different in your 70s than it is in your even early 30s. But these things, again, there are things that we can do to help slow the aging process and to help deal with these changes. Mental acuity. One of the biggest things, again, that they talk about is staying engaged, staying active, both physically active and mentally active. And that's where having a plan and thinking about what is going to keep you moving forward, what's going to keep you engaged and excited, is imperative. Physical abilities, as I said before, even incremental changes in your life to increase your physical activity, to help look at your diet and get that aspect of things under control. These small little changes can have a huge impact. And so keep moving, keep going, find ways to keep yourself physically engaged in things. Keeping control. Part of that is really what we talked about in terms even of the legal documents, because by planning ahead, you have then kept in control, even if you do get to a point in which you no longer can manage things for yourself. And the way that you've done that is by appointing someone who you trust, who you have a relationship with, and who understands what's important to you and has a framework for decision-making based on what you would want to have done if you were able to do that for yourself. And it's a way of keeping control even if you did lose control. And competence, again, people worry continually about losing competence and the idea of dementia. But the research has shown that taking the steps to keep yourself active, to keep yourself engaged, really can help to ward off or slow down any loss of competency or mental acuity. And so working to have a plan in place to be able to address these issues and keep yourself moving forward under your control when possible is critical as part of the life plan for yourself. Another area that we have people really take a look at, and again, none of this is a one and done situation. You really need to review the plan as you move forward and continually assess how things are changing for you. So your functional status is one of the critical areas that you have to look at and you have to be honest about. How are you doing at home? How are things going? How is your home set up? Is it set up to be able to have you successfully age in place? Is your bedroom on the first floor, your laundry, a bathroom, all of those kinds of things? Do you have a lot of steps to get in and out of the house? Or do you need to start thinking about making some changes? Maybe it's time to get rid of the large house with the multiple floors and move into a community or an area in which you can more successfully age in place if that's your desire. You also want to look at your overall community. What kinds of services are in your community? Is there transportation? Can you get to the grocery store? One of the benefits under this COVID environment that we're in right now is that we've really seen an increase in the use of things like grocery delivery and having more vendors, more companies out there adjust to and meet the needs for our desire to stay at home and to have more services come to us when appropriate. So these are the things you want to make sure that you understand how to access those services and if your community supports those services and has them in place. One of the big areas is driving. Are you driving currently? And should you be driving? And driving is one of the hardest parts. It's one of the last little bits of independence that a lot of us keep a hold of, sometimes longer than we should. And so do know there's resources out there. Emerson Hospital has a driving evaluation program that they offer that if you have concerns about your driving and about whether you should be, they really can help to do an evaluation to determine whether it's safe for you to continue to drive. And then if you are no longer driving, how are you going to go about keeping, again, yourself active, not getting isolated, making sure that you can access the services that you need? Can you manage your medications? There are companies out there now, both pharmacies as well as independent companies, who can help to set up medication management systems. We're actually very fortunate in Acton in particular that we have a town nursing department and they can help with that as well. And so it's understanding what the services are around you. We also, in particularly Acton, although all of the towns in this area are also served by what's called an Elder Service Corporation. We're serviced by Minuteman Senior Services. They take care of those who are age 65 or disabled in this particular catchment area. And they have many services such as care management services. They're the ones who do the Meals on Wheels. They have homemaking services. They have home health aid services. And so getting to know a little bit about these different organizations before you would ever need the services can be very helpful so that you know what your resources are ahead of time. And again, putting into place what your plan is if you can no longer manage any of the things that we've talked about. Planning ahead is really going to be critical for you. And then taking a look at housing and community. As I talked about, looking at your own space, looking at where you're living now. Is this going to support you as you age and as you potentially lose some functioning ability? Will you be isolated? That's one of the biggest things too that people deal with as they age is isolation. And particularly those who are in that category of being solo agers, isolation becomes more and more of an issue. COVID has really brought this up as a concern because the ways that we used to meet with each other, communicate with each other, being able to check in on each other have changed dramatically. And the level of isolation for many people has really grown. And so we're finding more and more people who are living independently in their own homes, but don't have the ability to be able to get out, to be able to in any way interact with others, is causing an incredible increase in isolation. And finding things like this type of an educational program, ways to be able to communicate with people, particularly during this COVID environment, is critical. One of the other things that I find is a barrier for many people is the willingness to accept help. It can be very hard if you've been an independent individual, you have lived on your own, taking care of your own needs for much of your life. Accepting help can be very difficult, but it can be the difference between being able to stay in your own independent living environment and having to go into some kind of community or facility for care. And so being willing to not only understand the level of help that you might need, but to accept that help can make a huge difference in being able to keep you in your current living situation for a longer period of time. And as with all of us, we have to stay open to change. We have to understand that change is the constant, as they say, and we constantly have to be willing to adapt as needed in order to make sure that our needs are being taken care of and that we're open to different ways of dealing with those needs as our needs change. So staying open to change and being willing to accept help is critical. Knowing your support system ahead of time, identifying what's available in terms of resources in your community, again, is critical before you need them, so you know who to reach out to and when to reach out. So I want to talk a little bit about the whole change of the world right now with COVID-19. It really has caused all of us to have to adjust to how we're doing things. Again, talking about isolation and how really that's become a problem for so many people. Finding ways to reach out, whether it be by using the telephone, emailing, Zoom, FaceTime, starting to learn or embrace some of the new technology. Reach out to all of the community events now, like the educational programs through the community ed departments, et cetera, have all had to pivot and find new ways to reach the community that they're serving. So take advantage of that. You're going to find that there are reduced cost situations now with not having in-person classes, let's say. Community colleges are doing different things and trying to reach out to the communities. The senior centers are all doing different things now to try to reach out to the communities that they serve. Find out what those are, research them, and take advantage of them so that isolation is really diminished where possible, because it's a big, big problem for us all. One of the things that they suggest is really considering identifying a buddy, to identify somebody else who you again can count on and they can count on you, to be someone who will check in on you on a regular basis, you checking in on them as well, to make sure that, again, this isolation and the concerns with mental health issues that are growing isn't setting in for you. Another thing is that this can be a person who you can at least reach out to in time of need. Should you become ill, if you need to get supplies, you can't get to the grocery store, you can't arrange for those things for some reason on your own, identifying and working with somebody else who you're comfortable with can be a kind of your lifeline to making sure that your needs are still met should something occur. Even if you get, a head cold, you've got, some kind of an illness going on short term, you need to make sure you've got somebody else who can help, making sure your supplies are in place and that you're being kind of looked out for, even if it's remotely. And it's making sure that somebody else has information about your emergency contacts, knows where to find your medication list, knows who potentially your doctors are, at least where to find out that information. And again, this ideally could be someone who is your healthcare proxy. If you don't have family members, loved ones, or friends who you feel you can rely on for that, developing a relationship with a professional who handles those kinds of issues is imperative, so that they know about you. They know where to find information about you, and they know how to communicate that information should some kind of crises occur. And one of the things that, they recommend is that you kind of have a go bag in case something did happen. And that go bag would have things like the important contacts in your life, the people you'd want to make sure are reached if there was some kind of an emergency that occurred. That you keep your medication list up to date and available, again, in case some kind of a medical crisis occurs. You have copies of your healthcare directives in place, your powers of attorney, your healthcare proxies, your HIPAA authorization and release form, and your MOLST or living wills if you have them in place, so that your healthcare providers can have a framework to make decisions should you be unable to communicate those yourself. Insurance cards are always important so that people understand what kind of insurance is available. And then some personal items, a phone charger to make sure it's in a bag and ready to go, because it's nothing worse than end up in the hospital where, unfortunately, isolation is still occurring, oftentimes because of the current COVID world, and not being able to charge up your phone and contact people that way when appropriate and able to do so. And if you wear glasses, worst thing for me is to end up in a hospital and not have my glasses because I wouldn't be able to see a thing. If you wear hearing aids, making sure maybe there's extra batteries for those and some extra clothing. So thinking about having kind of that bag planned ahead if something were to happen that had important items in it and important contact information and information about you, so that that is as smooth a transition as possible, even in the event of an emergency. So again, steps to really creating a successful life plan, particularly as a solo ager, is you want to look at your healthcare situation. You want to do what you can to adopt and maintain healthy habits and a positive lifestyle. Remember, those incremental changes can make a big difference. Getting out, being more active when possible, looking at some small changes in diet. Make sure that you've developed a good relationship with healthcare providers who can get to know you and who you have a level of comfort with should some kind of a crisis occur. Find ways to keep yourself stimulated, to keep yourself engaged. Look at what is important to you from a standpoint of involvement, of your interests, of your passions, and feed those where you can. And make sure that you keep that as a critical part of your own plan, and you continually feed your growth even as you age, because it's, again, keeping yourself engaged is critical to successful aging. Keep on top of your finances. Seek out financial help when you need to in order to be able to understand the options that are out there. One of the things that we're finding, unfortunately, as we age and the population over the age of 65, we're seeing more and more scams from a financial standpoint. So if something doesn't feel right, if you're not sure, make sure that you get help first before you go ahead and jump because you're concerned or someone is putting pressure on you to do something. They're finding vulnerable populations everywhere, and the scammers are relentless. So be careful of that. And then, work to maintain your own dignity, your health as you age. Really, a plan is not just a one and done. It's something that you want to look to put together for yourself, and then you want to review just on a regular basis to make sure it's still meeting your wishes, your desires, your goals, And if there are changes in things like your health, that your plan is pivoting to make sure that it takes those changes in place and then moves forward to, again, keep quality of life for you going, and to keep your wishes known as you go forward. I hope that was helpful to people, and I don't know if we have questions or concerns.
Hey,
Greg,
Kathleen.
how
Hi.
are you?
Good, thank you. I'm surprised that one of the things you didn't suggest was for older folks who are at home and can be isolated, that some kind of group formation doesn't happen for a lot of different reasons, for support, for social interactions, for a lot of things. And I understand that it's hard sometimes to get that kind of thing together, but are there other resources that could enable that kind of a collection of folks that want to get together socially and also for support purposes?
So there are. So in our community, we've got numerous ones. First of all of our towns do have councils on aging, and absolutely reaching out to the councils on aging. They are creating, particularly in the COVID environment at this point, they're pivoting and trying to get more virtual kinds of activities involved and groups potentially. The hospitals, Emerson Hospital, Lowell General, each of them as well have Neshoba. They have support groups based on certain illnesses, let's say, for caregivers, and again, they're working to try to bring people together. Minuteman Senior Services is trying to do more to reach out with support groups and doing those virtually. There also can be like the Alzheimer's Association, Parkinson's Disease Association, ALS, any of the different kinds of disease processes oftentimes have support groups and networks too that you can reach out to. But you're right, Greg, a lot of this is you have to do some searching as well to reach out and create. And Mary, I see you raising your hand on.
Yeah, I just wanted to say another thing, and I don't know whether this is present where you live, Greg, or in Acton, but there is this growing movement called the neighborhood movement that's local, where people create the essence of a network, and it has a social component. It is designed to, overcome isolation. Depending on the organization, they might have talks, they might have interest groups, but it's also about people in the community volunteering to visit others or to help with repairs or that kind of thing. So it's a kind of a grassroots effort to address exactly what you're talking about. And obviously this thing doesn't get created overnight, but believe it or not, while it's a national movement, it started on Beacon Hill a number of years ago with the recognition that this was something a lot of people need in order to age successfully at home in place.
Yeah.
Mary, thank you so much for mentioning that. I actually have heard of that, not in Acton, so I'm excited that we have it here. I've heard it more in the city locations in which you've got, apartments or, that type of thing in which many people are putting together their own cooperatives in some ways. So I'm thrilled to hear that that's also working its way into more of the suburbs.
Yeah, I don't know that it's in Acton, but I've heard that there's one in Brookline and or in Newton.
Yes.
And somebody told me that there was one that was emerging in, I think it was Arlington.
Well, wonderful. I want to thank everyone for taking the time. I hope this was helpful.
Take
Be
care.
well,
Bye.
everyone. Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.